Hello, my friends. While I'm blocked on LinkedIn and basically unable to work, I just couldn't leave you without news. I read all your messages. I cried like, I don't know, crazy. Okay. So it truly meant so much to read all the kind things you said to me. Thank you, really. Today there are so many important updates that I don't even know where to start. But I guess we'll begin with the fact that the situation at the border is seriously worsening, especially in the Kharkiv direction. There are ongoing assault attempts there, and Russian forces are trying to expand the territory they control in order to move further toward Kharkiv. Today, a video appeared from Russian sources showing them calmly flying drones around the outskirts of the city. Photos have also surfaced of another Russian drone that reached the northern outskirts of Kharkiv using fiber optic control. A new threat to Kharkiv. Russian fiber optic drones have begun reaching the city. One was found hanging in a tree on the northern outskirts, according to Defense Minister advisor Serhiy Flash. He says that the distance from the nearest Russian positions is more than 20 kilometers, and electronic warfare systems are unable to detect such targets. Radar systems could be a possible solution, but even they are not a guarantee when it comes to FPV drones. Friends, those of you who watched my previous videos carefully probably remember that I repeatedly said we would soon see more strikes on Kharkiv, and now we are seeing the beginning of that. In addition to missiles and Shahed drones, fiber optic FPV drones are now being used. The Russian border is simply too close to the city. These drones have now reached a level where they can hit the outskirts and destabilize the situation. So the map shows that it's only about 23 kilometers from the Russian border. And as we already know, protective road nets won't help here. So the drones are successfully flying past them and carrying out strikes. So yes, this situation is seriously deteriorating. In the Vovchansk area, attacks are still ongoing near the villages of Vilcha and Malavovcha. However, the Ukrainian side hasn't confirmed the loss of the village of Kravsk, so over the past 24 hours, there have been no changes to the front line there. In the Sumy direction, the situation is also concerning since the city is located nearly the same distance from the border as Kharkiv. Sooner or later, Russian drones may be able to reach there as well. Unfortunately, there isn't much good news for frontline cities right now. At the same time, the Russian forces are still trying to push forward and are attacking near Yablonivka and Oleksiivka. However, the Ukrainian forces are managing to repel all attacks, and there have been no changes there either. And before continuing with the frontline update, it's important to mention that yesterday evening, President Zelensky had a phone call with President Trump. I just spoke with US President Trump. His representatives, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, were also on the call, Zelensky said. We discussed the issues our representatives will be working on tomorrow in Geneva during the bilateral meeting, as well as preparations for the next meeting of the negotiation teams in a full trilateral format at the very beginning of March. We expect this to create an opportunity to move to negotiations at the level of leaders. President Trump supports this sequence of steps. It's also been reported that during the conversation, Trump said he wants the war to end within a month. According to Axios, Trump wants Russia's war against Ukraine to end within a month. The outlet, citing three informed sources, writes that the conversation between US President Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky was very friendly and positive. A Ukrainian official and another informed source said that Zelensky thanked Trump for the assistance provided and emphasized that he is the one who can force Putin to stop the war. One of the sources noted that Zelensky also said he hopes the war will end this year, and Trump responded that the war has gone on for too long and that he would like it to end within a month. At the same time, the White House didn't respond to a request for comment on this information. Uh, the Kremlin immediately commented on the situation as well, and Peskov said that before any meeting between the leaders takes place, extensive work must first be carried out by the negotiation team so that all issues are resolved, and only then would there be a meeting solely for the purpose of signing documents.
Witkoff stated that they very much hope for a meeting between Putin and Zelensky. And I believe such a meeting should take place before a trilateral meeting between Putin, Zelensky, and Trump.
Well, perhaps here one can agree that three presidents should meet only to finalize agreements or, as the Americans say, a deal. That is probably true. But as for the prospects of organizing a meeting between the president of Russia and Zelensky, for now let's simply recall his statements over the past week. What Ukraine will never agree to, what it will not accept, what it intends to do next, and so on. There's no need even to analyze them. Just remember them and ask the question, does it make sense to meet at the highest level if the Kiev regime continues to maintain such a position?
How do they even see this? That they, I mean the Ukrainian side, without properly discussing anything or reaching any agreements, will just sit down and immediately resolve the territorial issue. Is that how they imagine it?
Clearly, yes, the territorial issue is the most difficult one. And of course, any serious meetings must be preceded by very meticulous expert-level work. But as for the Kiev regime, I believe they are currently making every effort not to search for options for a peaceful settlement, but to search for ways to extract European money. They need to obtain these hundreds of billions of euros by any means necessary. That is what they are seriously working on. Seriousness in their approach to other issues we do not see.
Our proposal remains in force. If Zelensky wants to discuss something, he can come to Moscow.
Yes, that was President Putin's word. He always keeps his word.
Overall, it's obvious that the Russians don't want to resolve anything and are simply dragging out the negotiations. Johnson said that the West is not putting enough pressure on Putin. In an interview with Ukrainian journalist Dmytro Gordon, former UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson emphasized that he has no doubt about Ukraine's victory. There is no doubt that Ukraine will become a free country. The reason Ukraine hasn't yet won is that the West is so timid and afraid of provoking Putin, Johnson said. In his view, allies and partners should provide Ukraine with Tomahawks, crack down on Russia's shadow fleet, strengthen sanctions, stop trade in Russian oil, confiscate and transfer frozen Russian assets to Kyiv. If we do all of this together, we will put enormous pressure on Putin. Otherwise, I don't think he will make a deal. I truly don't, Boris Johnson noted. Now, let's move on to the situation along the front line. Since we've already covered the border area, we'll continue toward the Kupyansk direction. Here, the Russians are trying to regain positions on the outskirts of the city and are also assaulting Redkivka. Fighting continues as well for Peshane, Kolesnikivka, and Glushkivka. However, over the past 24 hours, there have been no changes. All attacks have been repelled. In the Borova direction, the Russians are assaulting Boryevska and Andriivka and pushing toward Shaykivka, Novosergiyevka, and the village of Stepove. There have been no changes over the past day, but activity has increased here, and the Russians are attempting to break through the defense. In the Lyman direction, activity remains relatively low for now. Russian forces are assaulting Stavky and pushing beyond Drobosheva. However, over the past 24 hours, there have been no changes. All attacks have been repelled. In the Sloviansk direction, the Russians are advancing beyond Zakitne and Dronivka and attacking near the villages of Kaleniki and in the Rai Oleksandrivka area. The Ukrainian forces report that if Russian forces manage to gain a foothold near Rai Oleksandrivka, the situation for Slavyansk could deteriorate significantly. That's why today Ukrainian forces are doing everything possible to hold the line. In the Kostantynivka direction. However, the situation is very bad. The Russians are trying to bypass the city from the flanks, and fighting is already ongoing on the outskirts. The Russians are attempting to gain a foothold in the area of the Perspectiva greenhouses south of Kostantynivka. This location provides cover, concealment, and the ability to accumulate infantry before pushing into urban development. From the landfill side, movements into the first houses of the Berestivsky district and the Ukrainsky Hutor area have been recorded. And the Russians are probing the edge of the defense, advancing in small groups, trying to secure positions in the private residential sector. The settlement of Berestov is still holding, but the fighting is effectively in its final stage. If the Russians break through, they will gain closer access to the southern outskirts of the city and the ability to expand their reach along tree lines and industrial zones. The Russians' tactic is the gradual gnawing of block after block, relying on cover. The Russians have also once again struck the dam in Kostantynivka. The Russians are trying to block our defense forces in Kostantynivka and completely cut off logistics. The day before, they blew up the local dam near Osikove. They also destroyed the bridge near Okka, which connected the right and left parts of Kostantynivka. Due to flooding of the right bank, the water has now reached the Drushkivka-Kostantynivka highway, making travel there extremely difficult. Overall, it's clear that the city doesn't have much time left. The Russians are doing this to capture it as quickly as possible. It's worth noting that after taking Kostantynivka, they will likely begin advancing toward Drushkivka and then further on to Kramatorsk, while from the north they would move in parallel toward Slavyansk. If by the end of the year they manage to seize these two major cities, they will most likely claim that they have captured most of Donetsk region and present it as a complete victory, since what would remain afterward would mainly be small villages. That is why extremely intense fighting is taking place here today. In the Dobropillia direction, activity remains minimal for now. The Russians are assaulting Sofiivka, but have achieved no success, and the front line here remains unchanged. In the Pokrovsk direction, the Russians are assaulting Rodinsk, Novoalexandrivka, and Hryshine, and are attempting to break through toward Pokrovsk along the western flank. Soldiers of the Armed Forces of Ukraine describe the situation as follows. In the Pokrovsk direction, key battles are ongoing in the areas of Rodinsk and Hryshine. The Russians have partially advanced further in both settlements. In Rodinsk, our control is minimal, but so is the Russians, as there is a vast great zone where neither side dares to establish firm positions. In Hryshine, the situation is slightly different. The Russians are still trying to infiltrate deeper into our defenses. Overall, roughly 40% of the area can be considered under our control. Everything else remains in the gray zone. One large gray zone, more precisely a kill zone, is the space between Pokrovsk and Mirnograd to the north. A significant number of structures and industrial facilities there prevent the Russians from advancing further. The overall situation remains critical. In the Novopavlivka direction, attacks are continuing only on Filia, and there have been no changes along the front line here. In the direction of Pokrovsk in Dnipropetrovsk region, Ukrainian forces continue counterattacks in the areas of Zlahoda and Tarnove. Fighting is also reported near Zaporizhzhia, but for now there have been no changes to the front line there. In the Huliaipole direction, the Russians are assaulting Tsvetkove, Zaliznичne, the outskirts of Huliaipole, and are advancing toward Myrne across the fields. The situation is very difficult, and the number of shelling here is not decreasing, so the Russians are leveling all frontline villages to the ground. In the Zaporizhzhia direction, the Russians are assaulting Stepove and Stepnohirsk, but have achieved no success. All attacks are being repelled here as well, so the front line remains stable. In the Kherson direction, shelling of the right bank continues. The Russians are even showing strikes against civilian vehicles. Overall, the situation remains difficult, but they still haven't managed to advance onto the right bank. Meanwhile, Vance stated that Trump is fully optimistic and wants to end the war quickly.
On Ukraine and Russia, 5 years now, Eastern Europe has been exploding. Is Vladimir Putin simply putting you off in these on again, off again talks as they go?
Bill, I think we've been engaged in very, very deliberate negotiations with both the Russians and the Ukrainians. Obviously, the Russians have some red lines, the Ukrainians have some red lines, and the president has just set the entire team from Marco Rubio on down to try to bring the killing to a close. You know, it's hard. As the president has said multiple times, he thought this was going to be the easiest war to solve. I agreed with him. It has turned out to be much more difficult. But I think that we're making progress, Bill. I think we're making progress with both the Russians and the Ukrainians, and we're just going to keep working at it. You know, eventually we're either going to be successful or we're not going to be. Right now, I think the president has some good optimism that we can bring this thing to a successful close. It's bad for the world. It's bad for America. So we're going to keep working at it.
You can certainly understand how people look at this from the outside and think that Putin is just buying time, right?
Well, Bill, you know, this point, I understand this point, and sure, I'm sure that Vladimir Putin has his military objectives, and obviously he hasn't stopped the killing, even though the president wants that very much to happen. But the way to solve this is to continue to engage in diplomacy. And so that's what the president has asked us to do. We're under no illusions that these guys are going to, you know, meet in the middle of a field, give each other a hug and sing Kumbaya. That's why we're engaged in the diplomacy that we are engaged in. We are optimistic. that we can get to a point where both the Russians and the Ukrainians feel they've accomplished enough of what they need to bring the killing to a stop. That's what the president has set us out to do.
All right, big stakes on both those topics now. Let's end.
But that's not all. It has been reported that Poland is already preparing for war with Russia. Poland is preparing for a Russian attack and is launching the underground shield plan. The Warsaw Metro will be converted into a bomb shelter, said the city mayor. The project involves adapting stations and technical facilities to store emergency equipment. The city is creating special zones for water supplies, coats, blankets, and other necessities. Technological cavities are being prepared to store equipment. The city authorities have started purchasing generators and additional equipment. So it seems the war may not stop and could even escalate over the Third World War. But friends, what do you think about this? Share your thoughts in the comments. And that's all from me. So please, as usual, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on all the latest news. Once again, thank you so much for your kind words. I love you. And bye bye.